something a little different. It's old. It's quite lovely. In fact, the catalog said it delights the eye with its flashing beauty. This is a Rickenbacker Model 100, the silver Hawaiian lap steel guitar. They were first produced in 1937, and it really is kind of a masterpiece of Art Deco design. These were built in Los Angeles. They're plated in nickel. The body was stamped out using technology that has a lot to do with the automobile industry of the 1930s. It's basically a Duesenberg. It's very modernist looking.
Rickenbacker, which started off with more Germanic spelling involving an H rather than a K, is known for being the company which produced the first viable electrically amplified guitar. This thing here, the A-Series Electro Hawaiian, sometimes called the frying pan. Yes, there were some electric antecedents, but they've been overshadowed, and so we must never speak of them. It looked kind of like a tiny little banjo. These are steel guitars that are played horizontally in your lap, and the strings aren't pressed down onto the frets. You use a slide to sound the notes. In 1935, they added the Model B, which is made of Bakelite with some shiny metal plates on the top. It was still tiny, but more guitar-shaped. This one here happens to be an example of the Electro-Spanish variant, designed for upright play on your knee, like what we would consider a normal guitar.
Then in 1937 came this one, the NS, or New Style. It lasted until 1943, so about 6 years. I'm surprised it made it that long, to be honest, because it's full of metal that would have been in super high demand for the war effort. Now, I'm not an expert in these things. I'm sure there are some Rickenbacker nerds in the audience who can date it based on the length of a particular screw or chemical analysis of the plating material. That's beyond me. I do know they started off the first year with just one volume knob. Then for the next year they got a volume and tone and placed them on opposite sides of the pickup. Then in 1939 they put them both on the same side, but they went a little crazy and used one black knob and one white knob. These do appear to be original Bakelite knobs from that era, so I'm assuming that this is from 1940 to 1943. That's as close as I can get it. The serial numbers on these guitars, unreliable. There's no way of really correlating it with year, as far as I've heard. This guitar has a bit of an issue. It's hard to transport because it has a long patch cord, which is very old, permanently installed through the side of the guitar. It's bulky enough that it doesn't want to fit in the case, and instead it sort of dangles outside in an obscene fashion. Why is it like this? From what I've seen, they didn't come from the factory this way. Every photo I've researched shows a standard jack. Maybe he was a session musician in high demand and wanted to cut his plug-in time in half. So I'm going to remove this and install a standard jack. Thinking about it, maybe the original patch cord split or the head broke off somehow and this was a stopgap measure that never got fixed. Maybe someone threw a Bowie knife at the performer while he was on stage, and thinking quick, he flipped the cord into its path, diverting it from its sinister flight. And then with a grin he proceeded to spin a quick yarn for the audience as he deftly spliced the cut ends into the pickup leads, hardwiring it. And he was back to playing before you could say Ralph Mooney. To gain access to this thing, I'm going to have to take out this historically significant and much loved horseshoe pickup. It's a very big magnet and it weighs a ton. But while I'm in there, I'm also going to perform some surgery and excise some stuff. I'm told these things are full of paper. Why? I'm not sure. I'm also told that they can sound better if that paper is removed. Now, I don't know that for certain. I'd be inclined just to leave it, but the player is interested in having it cleaned out while I'm in there. So I'm going to save it in a little box for him in case he decides that this was a bad idea. We can always put it back in. On the headstock, this decal or sticker is a later addition. These had small embossed metal nameplates, and obviously at some point during its history that was taken off the guitar and someone added this instead. These appear to be the original tuners. Only one of the buttons is showing any deterioration, which is what happens with celluloid stuff over the long haul, but it's actually still in reasonable condition, relatively speaking. I've seen a lot worse. Oh, hey, don't mind me. I'm just going to be here physically untying the strings from the posts. These have been passed through the middle hole
a number of times, which is very, very wrong. Especially on a guitar where you'd like to keep the finish on the headstock in good shape. So, Adolf Rickenbacker. He was born in Switzerland, and he was orphaned at a very young age. I think he was around 5 or 6. Then he was sent to America to live with some relatives. I think they lived in Wisconsin first, but then moved to California. And they had like a family business involving sheet metal. They specialized in press forming it. So it was pretty cool in the late 1920s when John Dopiera and his partner George Beauchamp came calling, looking for someone to help out with their idea for a metal-bodied resonator guitar. Of course, that was right up Adolph's alley, and they formed National. Pretty soon, Dopiera left to build Dobros with his brother, and Rickenbacker became interested in the idea of electronic amplification. So he sold National back to the Dopiera brothers, and he focused on the frying pans and the amplifiers you needed to use them. And he kept it up into the early 1950s, and when he finally sold the company. So the standard or iconic Rickenbacker electric guitars that we associate with the brand, they didn't develop until after he was gone. He was very much a lap steel guy. So the nut is pretty much loose, except for a couple of plastic pins which are molded into its underside there. Just sits in a couple of holes. These are made of Bakelite, which is an early form of plastic. Now, we want a good snug-fitting screwdriver. And we'll loosen all of the retaining screws. This has a patent number on the pickup, which I assume means something in the dating of these things. Okay, and being very gentle, because we're dealing with 80-year-old electronics, I guess these guys are part of it too. They're not, actually. They're height adjusters. The rubber O-rings had been sticking the parts together. Very delicate here. That is some vintage wire. And there is, in fact, some tissue paper in here. There we go, vintage tissue paper. Which I suppose we can use to hold this in place while I very carefully remove the knobs if possible. The knobs have tiny little set screws on the sides. Just marking them so they'll go back on the right knob. This end of the body cavity is filled with something quite hard, which was obviously liquid at some point, or malleable, like mastic, or I don't know what that is. I was hoping there might be enough slack in the wire to just remove the volume, but they were just too tight in there and I felt it was risky, so I knew I'd have to take them both out at this point. Of course, I think this one went in before the black stuff was put in there. This could be very annoying. Maybe there's enough give for me to turn this thing. Massive pot. Wow. Usually I edit this stuff out, but you guys need to experience a little bit from time to time. There's a lot of patience and frustration in this kind of work. We'll see what we're working with here. That pot is tucked up on top of whatever this is. With my luck, it's a combination of lead and asbestos. It has the consistency of hard candy or coal. I could crack it. It smells sort of petroleum-like. It reminds me of old-school plasticine, you know, slightly oily. Maybe it's asphaltum that's been vitrified. It was pretty filthy stuff. Well, having chopped through 16 feet of anthracite, I gotta ask, why? And if someone knows, you gotta tell me. What is this stuff? Okay. There is a vintage Mallory cap here. It's a TP 426, 0.05 microfarad. And I'm beginning to wonder whether this patch cord was actually integral, like from the beginning, because unless someone did the work and then poured whatever that resin was in there, there was no way this tone pot was coming out. Like you see, there's still stuff adhered to the bottom of it. This is very strange. There's a rubber grommet in here, and the resin also is in front of it too, so yeah. This is really bizarre. I can't imagine. I've never seen one of these advertised with a cord, unless they've all been changed at some point in the past. Well, that disintegrated quick. This was in front of it. Let's bag it and see if we can get some DNA off it. On the volume pot, it says Centralab USA, Milwaukee, patents pending. And we'll see if we can chip off some of this gunk to see what the tone pot reads. Stack pull 250. I don't see a date marker or anything else on this. The cord connections were on top of other wires on the lugs there, but that could be accounted for by simple order of operations, because the patch cord would go on last anyway. It attaches to something outside the guitar. And that solder does look old. I think I'll go with some braided cloth wire. Seems period appropriate. I think I'll also put some shrink tube on these as well, because it's pretty close quarters in there with a great big pot and that uninsulated cap lead, just in case things get spun around at some point. I'm sure that tone cap has drifted from its original tolerances, but with these old things, if it's still functioning in its purpose, and this one is still making things darker and brighter, might as well leave it. There are people who are anxious to replace anything that isn't right on spec, but where does it end then, you know? Should I put new pots in? That's a rhetorical question.
Okay, stringing up. The player would like to use an open tuning C, or I guess this is actually a C6, which is quite popular with lap steel players. It's C-E-G-A-C-E, from low to high. And to that end, he's researched a set of strings here that will give him reasonably even tension across the fingerboard so it feels nice under the hand when you're sliding. The reasons why the strings had been tied on previously are becoming clearer to me. The holes that go through the posts on this thing are exceptionally low. They're very close to the surface of the headstock. So close that you really can't get a wrap under them, at least with the wound strings. So I'm going to do something that feels very wrong, but which should be fine in this case, and wrap upwards, and wrap up the post. Because we've got this nice tall nut here with a lot of height, it'll work just fine. There's plenty of break angle here, and when it comes time to change the strings, it won't take 20 minutes and a bunch of swearing. The tuners need a little bit of lubrication. The underside of this thing is as pretty as the top side. Oh, when you get these old 3-on-a-plate tuners that seem really stiff, to the uninitiated, it makes sense to put oil on the gear. That's where you think the rubbing is happening. The stiffness is actually occurring usually between the post and these uprights. So you've got to get, I use 3-in-1 oil, which is a penetrating lubricant. Penetration being paramount. Get some oil, a little bit is all you need, in the corners here where the worm rubs up against the uprights. And that will make things much, much easier to turn. We'll go honky tonkin' honey baby. I don't have a traditional steel for this. I'm just using a brass tube. So probably not going to get the best tone. And of course I have no idea what I'm doing. So we'll see what it does.